Daniel chapter 11 recounts a prophecy about the power struggles between the kings of the north and the south, their political manipulations, betrayals, wars, and the influence these conflicts have on the holy people. The chapter starts with the prediction of Persian kings and the rise of a mighty Greek king, Alexander the Great. The text then discusses the division of Alexander's empire into 4 parts following his death and the consequent rise of the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kingdoms. The chapter provides an intricate account of wars, marriages, betrayals, and alliances between these 2 powers as they rise and fall. It details the invasions of the glorious land, interpreted as Israel, by the king of the north and his eventual defeat. Significantly, the narrative in this part of the chapter sheds light on the Abomination of Desolation set up by Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a Seleucid king who outlawed Judaism, desecrated the temple, and triggered the Maccabean revolt. By verse 35, we reach a transitional point in the prophecy where the historical events blend into the end times, meaning 1798. Events that are fulfilled, and the last verse of the chapter yet to be fulfilled. From this pivotal point, we'll dive deep into the latter part of Daniel chapter 11, an enigmatic prophecy that reaches from the ancient past and extends into the not distant future. Now, let's unravel the mysteries of verses 36 and beyond as we journey together through the prophetic landscapes of Daniel's vision. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. The sovereign figure unveiled in this context cannot signify the identical power last noted, the papal authority. Applying the given descriptions to that entity would result in an unsatisfactory alignment. Consider an assertion from the subsequent verse, nor regard any god. The papacy has never exhibited such a trait. Although the placement of God and Christ has been frequently distorted, their existence and role have never been openly discarded or renounced within the framework of this religious system. 3 distinct traits must characterize the power that fulfills this prophecy. Its emergence should correspond with the onset of the time of the end, as indicated in the preceding verse. Its disposition should be willful, and its nature atheistical. Perhaps the latter 2 specifications could be amalgamated by suggesting that its obstinacy would manifest in the form of atheism. France epitomizes the fulfillment of this prophecy. A revolution mirroring this description materialized in France during the prophetic timeline. Atheists planted the seeds that germinated into their logical and destructive harvest. Voltaire, in his grandiose yet futile arrogance, declared, "I am weary of hearing people repeat that 12 men established the Christian religion. I will prove that 1 man may suffice to overthrow it." He collaborated with the likes of Rousseau, d'Alembert, Diderot, and others to actualize his assertion. They reaped the tempest sown by their actions. Moreover, the Roman Catholic Church's corruption was notoriously rampant in France during this era, stirring the populace's desire to break free from ecclesiastical subjugation. This culminated in the infamous Reign of Terror of 1793, when France renounced the Bible and the existence of deity. A contemporary historian chronicles this significant religious transformation. A few members of the convention were the pioneers in supplanting Christian worship in the provinces with civic rituals during the autumn of 1793. In Abbeville-Dumont, after informing the masses that the priests were mere jesters in black robes displaying marionettes, established the worship of reason. Paradoxically, he arranged his marionette spectacle of an extraordinarily solemn nature with dances in the cathedral every decade, and civic festivals he fervently advocated for observance. Fouché was the next to abolish Christian worship. Delivering a sermon from the pulpit of the Nevers Cathedral, he officially dismissed all spiritualism from the Republican agenda, announced the infamous decree that declared death an eternal slumber, thereby locking the gates of heaven and hell. In his laudatory address to the former bishop, the president pronounced that since the Supreme Being desired no worship other than the worship of reason, that would henceforth be the national religion. But there are other and still more striking specifications which were fulfilled by France. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. The Hebrew term for woman can also be interpreted as wife. Thomas Newton suggests a more apt translation of this passage would be the desire of wives. This hints that this ruling entity, while professing God's non-existence, concurrently trampled upon the divine laws regulating the institution of matrimony. Interestingly, we observe the historian, perhaps inadvertently, yet all the more significantly, pairing the atheism and licentiousness of this regime in the exact order the prophecy outlines. He states, family, once the very cornerstone of society under the old regime, had been dismantled. The decree of September 20th, 1792, which established divorce, a measure further extended by the Convention in 1794, bore unforeseen consequences within merely 4 years. An immediate divorce could be granted on grounds of temperamental incompatibility to take effect within a year at the latest, if either party resisted separation before that period. Divorce had become rampant. By the end of 1793, a mere 15 months after the decree's enactment, 5,994 divorces had been sanctioned in Paris. Under the Directory, we witness women legally transferred from one man to another. What became of the children born from these transient unions? Some were abandoned. In the year 5, foundlings rose to 4,000 in Paris and 44,000 in other departments. When parents retained their offspring, the outcome was a tragically absurd confusion. Men married several sisters in succession. One citizen petitioned the 500 for permission to marry the mother of his 2 previous wives. The family was dissolved. Nor regard any god. Complementing the evidence previously presented demonstrating the nation's rampant atheism during this era, we add the following. The constitutional Bishop of Paris was showcased to play the lead role in the most audacious and scandalous farce ever performed before a national assembly. He was ceremoniously brought forth to declare to the convention that the religion he had propagated for years was, in all aspects, priestcraft without any basis in history or sacred truth. He publicly disavowed the existence of the deity to whose worship he had been dedicated and pledged himself henceforth to the admiration of liberty, equality, virtue, and morality. Subsequently, he relinquished his episcopal regalia on the table, receiving a fraternal embrace from the president of the convention. Several renegade priests emulated this prelate's actions. Hébert, Chaumet, and their associates came forward and declared, God does not exist. Godly fear was considered not the dawn of wisdom, but the commencement of foolishness. All forms of worship, barring that of liberty and country, were banned. The religious treasures of gold and silver were confiscated and defiled. Churches were shuttered, bells were shattered and recast into cannons. The Bible was burned in public. Sacramental vessels were contemptuously paraded through the streets atop a donkey. A 10-day week replaced the traditional 7-day cycle, and death, declared in bold letters at burial sites, was an eternal slumber. The pinnacle of blasphemy, if such infernal excesses admit gradation, was reached by the actor Monvel, as a priest of Illuminism who proclaimed, God, if you exist, avenge your wronged name. I defy you. You stay silent. You dare not unleash your thunderbolts. Who henceforth will believe in your existence? This spectacle reveals the nature of man when left to his own devices, and the character of infidelity when legal restraints are cast aside and it gains the reins of power. Can there be any doubt that these are the scenes the all-seeing foresaw and documented on the sacred page when indicating a kingdom destined to rise that would elevate itself above every god and pay no heed to any? But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. We encounter an apparent paradox in this verse. How might a nation disregard every god yet revere the God of forces? It could not concurrently embrace these stances, yet it might initially dismiss all gods, then subsequently institute the worship of the God of forces. Was such a transition observed in France during this period? Indeed it was. The endeavor to render France a godless nation led to such chaos that the leaders feared losing their grasp on power. Consequently, they recognized the political necessity of reintroducing some form of worship. However, they had no intention of fostering devotion or cultivating genuine spiritual growth among the populace, but rather sought to maintain their rule and control the nation's forces. A selection of historical excerpts illuminates this. Liberty and country initially became the objects of adoration. Liberty, equality, virtue, and morality, concepts diametrically opposed to their actual attributes or practices, were heralded as the descriptors of the nation's deity. In 1793, the worship of the goddess of reason was introduced as depicted by a historian. A ceremony of this deranged era remains unparalleled for its blend of absurdity and sacrilege. The convention doors swung open to a group of musicians, before whom the municipal body members entered in a solemn procession, chanting a hymn to liberty and escorting a veiled woman, christened the Goddess of Reason, as the focus of their future reverence. Upon reaching the bar, she was ceremoniously unveiled and placed to the right of the president. The assembly widely recognized her as a dancer from the opera, familiar with her stage performances and further individual experiences. This woman, deemed the ideal representation of the reason they venerated, received public homage from France's National Convention. This blasphemous and ludicrous spectacle gained popularity. The installation of the Goddess of Reason was replicated and emulated throughout the nation, in areas where the citizens wished to display their allegiance to the revolutionary heights. The contemporary French historian Louis Madeleine notes, "The assembly, citing business as its excuse for absence, witnessed a motley procession accompany the goddess to the Tuileries, coercing the deputies to convert Notre Dame into the Temple of Reason in her presence. In response to demands for more, a subsequent goddess of reason, Momoro, a convention member's wife, was installed at Saint-Sulpice on the following décade. Liberties and reasons multiplied across France, often debauched women, interspersed with the occasional respectable goddess of good pedigree. One such liberty supposedly wore a headband inscribed with "Turn me not into license," an advice arguably applicable across France, as the norm became repulsive saturnalia. In Lyon, we hear, an ass was offered drink from a chalice. Payen denounced these goddesses, more debased than those of myth. While this whimsical worship of reason seized the nation, the revolution's leaders were historically branded the atheists. Soon they discerned that a religion with stronger sanctions than the one currently in practice must be established to govern the populace. Thus, a subsequent form of worship, venerating the supreme being, emerged. While it remained devoid of life reformation or genuine godliness, it appealed to the supernatural. As the goddess of reason was indeed a strange god, the assertion about honoring the god of forces may be more fittingly attributed to this latter phase. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange god, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. The system of paganism that had found its way into France manifested in the veneration of the idol represented by the goddess of reason and governed by a pagan ritual enacted by the National Assembly for the French populace, endured until the ascension of Napoleon to the Provisional Consulate of France in 1799. The followers of this unconventional religion fortified the nation's strongholds, as this verse indicates. Perhaps what most distinctly anchors this prophecy's relevance to France is the declaration in the final clause of the verse that they would divide the land for gain. Prior to the Revolution, the Catholic Church and a small group of landowners with vast estates held France's landed property. Inviolable by laws that prohibited partitioning by heirs or creditors, these lands remained undivided. However, revolution is heedless of law, and amidst the ensuing anarchy, highlighted in Revelation 11, noble titles were abolished, and their lands were subdivided and sold to enrich the public treasury. The government, desperate for funds, seized these expansive estates, selling them at auctions in portions to match the buyer's needs. A historian documents this extraordinary transaction. the confiscation of 2/3 of the landed property in the kingdom, which arose from the decrees of the Convention against the emigrants, clergy, and persons convicted at the revolutionary tribunals, placed funds worth above £700 million at the disposal of the government. Where, indeed, and when did an event so completely fulfill a prophecy? As the nation began to regain its senses, a call for a more enlightened religion emerged, and the pagan ritual was discarded. A historian describes this turn of events. An audacious third measure was the rejection of the pagan ritual and the reinstatement of the churches for Christian worship, a feat entirely credited to Napoleon, who had to overcome the philosophical biases of virtually all his colleagues. In his discourse with them, he did not purport to be a believer in Christianity. Instead, he stressed the necessity of providing the populace with conventional worship means if tranquility was to be maintained. Priests willing to pledge allegiance to the government were readmitted to their roles. This judicious act resulted in the acquiescence of no fewer than 20,000 religious ministers who had, until then, languished in French prisons. Thus concluded the Reign of Terror and the French Revolution. From the wreckage emerged Bonaparte, steering the turmoil towards his ascension, assuming the helm of the French government and striking fear into the hearts of nations. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. Monarchs of south and north in renewed conflict. After a protracted period, the sovereigns of the south and the north re-emerge in the theatre of history. We have encountered nothing to suggest that we should seek these powers in any other locations than those which shortly after Alexander's demise came to form the southern and northern divisions of his empire. In those times, Egypt was the southern king and the northern king was Syria, inclusive of Thrace and Asia Minor. Egypt sustained its reign in the territories assigned to the king of the south, while for over 4 centuries, Turkey held dominion over the lands initially constituting the king of the north's realm. This prophetic interpretation anticipates a conflict to emerge between Egypt and France, and between Turkey and France in 1798, a year that, as we have seen, signaled the dawn of the time of the end. If historical records affirm that such a triangular war indeed erupted in that year, it would irrefutably attest to the accuracy of this interpretation. We consequently pose the question, is it true that at the time of the end, Egypt did push or put up a relatively weak resistance, while Turkey advanced like an unstoppable whirlwind against him, namely the government of France? We have already presented some evidence that the time of the end commenced in 1798. And it is common knowledge among historians that a state of open animosity between France and Egypt was established that year. before Bonaparte's eyes in these ancient eastern lands, extending beyond Egypt to Syria, Persia, Hindustan, and even the Ganges. He had no trouble convincing the Directory that Egypt was the vulnerable point through which England could be struck by disrupting her eastern trade. Consequently, the Egyptian campaign was launched under the aforementioned pretext. The fall of the papacy, marking the end of the 1260 years and indicating the onset of the time of the end as per verse 35, transpired in February 1798, when Rome capitulated to Berthier, the French general. Subsequently, on March 5th, Bonaparte received the Directory's decree regarding the expedition against Egypt. He departed from Paris on May 3rd and embarked from Toulon on May 19th, leading a substantial naval fleet consisting of 13 ships of the line, 14 frigates, some of them unarmed, a significant number of smaller warships, and around 300 transport vessels. More than 35,000 troops were on board, along with 1,230 horses, including the crews, the committee of savants dispatched to examine Egypt's wonders, and the attendants. The total number of persons aboard amounted to approximately 50,000. It has even been estimated as high as 54,000. On July 2nd, Alexandria fell and was promptly fortified. The decisive Battle of the Pyramids was waged on the 21st, in which the Mamelukes fought with courage and desperation, but were no match for the disciplined legions of the French. Murad Bey lost all his artillery, 400 camels, and 3,000 men. The French casualties were minimal. On the 25th, Bonaparte made his entry into Cairo, the capital of Egypt, and only waited the subsidence of the floods of the Nile to pursue Murad Bey to Upper Egypt, whither he had retired with his shattered cavalry, and so make a conquest of the whole country. Thus, the king of the south was able to make but a feeble resistance. As the narrative unfolds, Napoleon's position increasingly teetered on the brink of precariousness. His only conduit of communication with France, the French fleet, met its tragic demise at the hands of the English, under Nelson at Aboukir. On the 11th day of September, 1798, incited by resentment towards France, which was subtly stoked by the English ambassadors in Constantinople and angered by the metamorphosis of Egypt, a long-standing semi-dependency of the Ottoman Empire, into a French province, the Sultan of Turkey declared war against France. Hence, the King of the North, being Turkey, rallied against France, mirroring the earlier confrontation with the King of the South, Egypt. Both these events unfolded at the time of the end, thus providing another irrefutable indication that 1798 marked the commencement of this prophesied era. This convergence of events, aligning impeccably with the prophecy, could not possibly be mere coincidence, but rather an affirmation of its fulfillment. Was the arrival of the King of the North, Turkey, akin to a whirlwind, especially when juxtaposed with Egypt's more subtle push? Having subdued the Egyptian armies, Napoleon sought to replicate this feat with the Sultan's armies, which were poised to assail from Asia. Departing Cairo for Syria on February 27, 1799, Napoleon commanded a formidable force of 18,000 soldiers. They successively claimed the Fort El Arish in the desert, conquered Jaffa, triumphed over the inhabitants of Nablus at Zeta, and emerged victorious at Jaffet. Concurrently, a potent Turkish force had fortified themselves at Saint-Jean d'Acre, while hordes of Muslims amassed in the mountains of Samaria, ready to descend upon the French during the siege of Acre. Sir Sidney Smith further bolstered the Turkish garrison with 2 English ships and seized Napoleon's siege apparatus sent from Alexandria. The appearance of a Turkish fleet in conjunction with Russian and English vessels embodied the prophecy's many ships of the King of the North. The siege commenced on March 18th, during which Napoleon was forced to twice deflect the advances of the swarming Mussulman hordes. Attempts to breach the city walls were met with such fierce resistance that the French, despite their utmost efforts, had to relent. After 60 days of unyielding struggle, Napoleon, for the first time in his illustrious career, conceded defeat, retracting his forces to Egypt on May 21, 1799. The phrase, "he shall overflow and pass over," presents another facet of the prophecy. the interpretation of which has been a subject of much debate among scholars. To whom do these words refer, France or the King of the North? The trajectory of interpretation hinges upon the resolution of this query. While some align these words with France, tracing the exploits of Napoleon, others ascribe them to the King of the North, thereby attributing the fulfillment to the unfolding annals of Turkey's history. We do not intend to delve into the third school of thought that introduces the papacy, as it seems markedly off course. Neither of these interpretations is devoid of ambiguities, but it remains incumbent upon us to side with the one bearing more substantial evidence. The application of this part of the prophecy to Napoleon or France under his rule lacks convincing events that could validate the remaining verses of this chapter. Consequently, the fulfillment of this prophecy must therefore be attributed to Turkey, unless it can be conclusively demonstrated that the designation King of the North does not pertain to Turkey, or that some power other than France or the King of the North fulfilled this part of the prediction. However, given that Turkey currently occupies the territory once held by the King of the North, it stands to reason that they now don the mantle of King of the North. Turkey, as the current ruler of the domain once controlled by the king, could fittingly assume the mantle of the King of the North. If no other power can potentially fulfill the unaccounted aspects of the prophecy, Turkey must be the focus of the prophecy. In this context, the King of the North is depicted as overflowing and passing over following his initial assault, a phrase suggestive of a far-reaching victory. This could symbolize the Ottoman Empire's expansive foray into territories across Europe, Asia, and Africa. The empire's surge, propelled by a blend of political and religious motives, was reminiscent of an overflow, breaching borders and engulfing lands under Ottoman influence. They surmounted hurdles, establishing themselves as a formidable Mediterranean power that reshaped Europe's political canvas. However, if Turkey, the contemporary sovereign of the territories once forming the northern part of Alexander's empire, fails to be acknowledged as the prophecy's King of the North, we are left without any interpretative compass. It can be safely assumed that no other entity could be introduced within the prophecy's framework at this juncture. Only France and the King of the North could fit into the prophecy. Hence, the realization of the prophecy must lie within their actions. Certain elements of verse 40 hint at a shift of the prophecy's focus from the power of France to the King of the North. The latter is depicted as a whirlwind of chariots, horsemen, and an armada of ships. We have observed this power's clash with France, and in this battle, the King of the North triumphed with the assistance of his allies. Meanwhile, France, thwarted in its endeavors, was compelled to fall back into Egypt. As such, it seems more natural to attribute the terms overflowing and passing over to the victorious power from this battle, which is Turkey. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. In the wake of a campaign where the French army was decimated, losing a third of its men to the ravages of war and pestilence, they withdrew from Saint-Jean d'Acre. After a grueling 26-day march, they found refuge once more within the familiar walls of Cairo, Egypt. Consequently, they forfeited all territories seized in Judea, and the glorious land known as Palestine, along with its associated provinces, referred to here as countries, reverted to the tyrannical governance of the Turk. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, situated beyond Palestine's borders to the south and east of the Dead Sea and Jordan, were spared from the destruction wrought by the Turks' march from Syria to Egypt. Their geographical placement offered them a reprieve from the destructive path of the campaign. Adam Clarke offers an intriguing annotation concerning this passage. The Turks have perpetually failed in their attempts to subdue these and other Arabian regions. They continue to inhabit the deserts, accepting an annual payment of 40,000 crowns of gold from the Ottoman emperors. In return, they guarantee unimpeded passage for caravans bearing pilgrims to the holy city of Mecca. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. As the French retreated to Egypt, a Turkish fleet landed an imposing force of 10,000 men at Aboukir. Napoleon, quick to react, launched a counterattack, successfully routing the Turks and reaffirming his control over Egypt. However, impending crises on the home front summoned Napoleon back to France, leaving the reins of his Egyptian operations in the hands of General Kleber. After a tenure marked by unflagging dedication to the welfare of the army, Kleber's life was tragically cut short by the blade of a Turk in Cairo. Leadership thus fell upon Abdallah Menu. Leading an army that could not be reinforced, each loss dealt a significant blow. Simultaneously, the English government, aligned with the Turks, sought to seize Egypt from the French. On March 13, 1801, an English fleet disembarked a contingent of soldiers at Aboukir. The ensuing battle witnessed a French retreat, and by the 18th, Aboukir had capitulated. Reinforcements, courtesy of a Turkish fleet, arrived on the 28th, as did the Grand Vizier, spearheading a formidable army from Syria. The town of Rosetta surrendered to the combined English-Turkish forces on the 19th. The French, now reduced to a force of 4,000 at Ramanieh, were defeated by an army of 8,000 English and 6,000 Turks. At El Manaya, a French contingent of 5,000 was forced to retreat by the vizier, who was advancing towards Cairo with an army of 20,000. The French army was cornered, ensnared within the confines of Cairo and Alexandria. Cairo surrendered on June 27th, and Alexandria capitulated on September 2nd. By October 1st, 1801, peace preliminaries were inked in London. The prophecy had dictated that Egypt shall not escape, which suggests that Egypt would fall under the rule of a power from which it would yearn to break free. Given the circumstances, where did the Egyptians' preferences lie between the French and the Turks? They favored French rule. According to R.R. Madden's Travels in Turkey, Egypt, Nubia, and Palestine, the French were well respected by the Egyptians and praised as benefactors. The brief period of their rule brought about significant improvements, and had they solidified their power, Egypt would be considerably more advanced today. In light of this, the scripture would not aptly apply to the French, as the Egyptians harbored no desire to liberate themselves from French rule. Their yearning for liberation was reserved for the Turks, a yearning which, unfortunately, went unfulfilled. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. In elucidating this verse, we refer to a historical account about Mehmet Ali, the Turkish governor of Egypt, who assumed power following the French defeat. Mehmet Ali, the newly appointed Pasha, embarked on a campaign to fortify his position, striving to secure a lasting grip on Egypt's governance for himself and his lineage. Recognizing that a substantial revenue was necessary not only for ruling Egypt, but also to appease the Sultan through generous tributes, he undertook a series of questionable actions aimed at accruing wealth. By contesting the legitimacy of numerous inheritances, incinerating title deeds, and annexing properties, he cavalierly disregarded the universally recognized rights of landowners. His actions naturally stirred great unrest, but Ali met these disturbances with a steadfast resolve, twisting the narrative to portray even the slightest claim of ownership as an affront by the sheikhs. Taxes were ceaselessly elevated, and the responsibility of their collection was delegated to military governors, a move that further exacerbated the plight of the peasantry, grinding them down to the barest of existence. Through his actions, Mehmet Ali made it abundantly clear that his primary concern was to bolster his own position and power at the expense of his subjects. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. On this verse, Adam Clarke has a note which is worthy of mention. He say, "This part of the prophecy is allowed to be yet unfulfilled." His note was printed in 1825. In another part of his comment he says, "If the Turkish power be understood, as in the preceding verses, it may mean that the Persians on the east and the Russians on the north will at some time greatly embarrass the Ottoman government. Between this conjecture by Adam Clarke, written in 1825, and the Crimean War of 1853 to 1856, there is certainly a striking coincidence. Inasmuch as the very powers he mentions, the Persians on the east and the Russians on the north, were the ones which instigated the conflict. Tidings from these powers troubled him, Turkey. Their attitude and movements incited the Sultan to anger and revenge. Russia, being the more aggressive party, was the object of attack. Turkey declared war on her powerful northern neighbor in 1853. The world looked on in amazement to see a government which had long been called the sick man of the East. A government whose army was dispirited and demoralized, whose treasuries were empty, whose rulers were vile and imbecile, and whose subjects were rebellious and threatening secession. Rush with such impetuosity into the conflict. The prophecy said that they should go forth with great fury, and when they thus went forth in the war aforesaid, they were described in the profane vernacular of an American writer as fighting like devils. England and France, it is true, soon came to the help of Turkey, but she went forth in the manner described and, as reported, gained important victories before receiving the assistance of these powers. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. We have meticulously traced the unfolding prophecy of Daniel's 11th chapter to its final verse. The precise alignment of divine predictions with historical actualities serves to fortify our faith in the eventual realization of God's prophetic edict. The heart of verse 45 lies in the embodiment of power known as the King of the North. It denotes the entity that will retain the territories once held by the original northern king. The prophetic narrative asserts of this northern king that he shall come to his end and none shall help him. The manner, timing, and location of this anticipated demise are elements we will observe with a gravely keen interest, cognizant that providence meticulously guides the fate of nations. In due course, time will elucidate this matter. And once this event transpires, what then ensues? The ensuing chapters point towards happenings of profound significance to every denizen of this world, as the subsequent chapter promptly reveals.
Binlerce yıldır olduğu gibi bugün de dünya barışının anahtarı Kudüs'tür. Barış çınarı Kudüs'te yıkılırsa bunun altında tüm dünya kalır. Kudüs'ü tümüyle İsrail'in kanlı pençelerine terk etmek sadece orada yaşayan Müslümanlara ve Hristiyanlara değil tüm insanlığa yapılmış en büyük kötülük olacaktır. Mazlum Filistin halkına ve Kudüs-ü Şerif'e yaptıkları tacizlere seyirci kalarak İsrail'i cesaretlendiren herkes ortaya çıkacak vahim sonuçların sorumluluğuna ortaktır. Filistin halkının ve devletinin özellikle güvenliğini işgalci İsrail'e bırakmak, kuzuyu kurda teslim etmek de aynıdır. Çok enteresan. Bu açıklamayı yapıyor Sayın Trump. Yanında kim var? Seçim kaybetmiş bir Netanyahu var. Basın mensupları içeri alınıyor. Türk medyası içeri alınmıyor. Hani sizde basın özgürlüğü vardı? Hani siz basın özgürlüğünden yanaydınız? Acaba aynı şeyi Türkiye'de biz Amerikan medyasına yapacak olsak ne yaparsınız? Kıyameti koparırsınız. Peki Türk medyasını niye almadınız bu toplantıya? Neden? Hadi bunu da açıklayın. İşte bunların özgürlük anlayışı bu. Basın özgürlüğü anlayışı bu. İstedikleri kadar plan yapsınlar, istedikleri kadar zulüm işlesinler, Allah'ın yardımı ve vicdanlı, ahlaklı, hakkaniyetli insanların desteğiyle Kudüs davası hep ayakta kalacaktır.
The fall of Turkey, after it invades Jerusalem, will be a significant sign of the imminent return of Jesus Christ and the end of the world. The fall of the Turks and their invasion will signal that Michael stands up and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. The invasion of the glorious Holy Mountain, that is Jerusalem, would mean significant geopolitical changes in the Middle East and the world, and Turkey's downfall would set the stage for the final events of Earth's history, culminating in the return of Jesus Christ. A letter by Albert Pike was written to Giuseppe Mazzini in 1871 regarding a conspiracy involving 3 world wars that were planned in an attempt to take over the world. The description of the first 2 world wars can be found on the internet for everyone to see how precisely the Jesuits and their puppet Freemasons implemented the plans of their master Satan. Here is the description of the predicted last world war. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which, in all its horror, will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere, the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. The pure doctrine of Lucifer is the Trinity. The weekly day the world will be forced to worship this false triune God will be Sunday. Fearful sights of a supernatural character will soon be revealed in the heavens, in token of the power of miracle-working demons. The spirits of devils will go forth to the kings of the earth and to the whole world to fasten them in deception and urge them on to unite with Satan in his last struggle against the government of heaven. By these agencies, rulers and subjects will be alike deceived. They will perform wonderful miracles of healing and will profess to have revelations from heaven, contradicting the testimony of the scriptures.